Hi English 110 students. I wanted to make this short video to talk about your Works Cited page and also your in-text citations. So as you're working on your research, keep in mind that in your final draft, you're going to want to cite anything that's a quote from your source, paraphrases if you're paraphrasing really specific information from a source, summaries of key information, statistics, data, and facts. Anything you find in your research, you want to cite those. And you're going to be citing in two places. In the body of your essay, right next to the quote or data, and also on your Works Cited page. As you're researching and writing, you want to find some method of keeping track of which quote or statistic is from which source. There's many ways to do this. Some students in the drafting stage will just use a URL as a placeholder after a piece of data or a quote, and then go back and change it to the correct MLA citation at the end. That's fine. There are many methods to keep track, but you want to find some way of keeping track which quote is from which source, because this is going to save you a lot of time in the end. And then when you go to make your in-text citation, it's best to make your Works Cited page entry first and then make your in-text citation. That's just the easier process. So as a reminder, this is from Student Voices. On your Works Cited page, you're going to see that you're going to have it organized alphabetically by last name, and you're going to have a hanging indent. So the hanging indent is where the first line is all the way flush left, and then if your source has one extra line or two extra lines or three extra lines, all of those are indented. And this makes it really easy for your reader to see your in-text citation, which will be, the last name, typically, and match it up with the more information about that source. So this really saves your reader time. Let's talk a little bit more about the Works Cited page. So for MLA, you're going to want to include all of the information that's available about your source. And if some of this information is not applicable, not available, you can just skip over that information. So typically your sources are going to start with the last name of the author, comma, and then the first name, and then the title of the source. For titles, you want to use quotes around those if they're short works, so short articles, pages on websites. And then longer works, like books, you're going to use italics for. The container is just what that source is located in. So this might be a website. If you're found an article, this might be the journal that article is published in. So there's many different types of containers. And then, location. So that could be the page numbers if it's in a book, or the URL if it's from a website. And sometimes you won't have all that information. So sometimes there won't be an author. This is actually pretty typical for many online sources. Sometimes this author is really a group author. So maybe it's an organization like the CDC that published that page on a website, or a nonprofit, or in the school, an institution like Harvard University may have published something that was written by a group of people, and instead of listing everybody who collaborated, there just won't be an author. And that's okay. You can go ahead and skip that information. And then the next thing would be the title of the source. So here, for instance, there's a really credible website called the World Factbook run by the CIA. And in this case, there's no author for this page about Hong Kong. So we just skip that information. And the first thing on our Works Cited page will be Hong Kong Economy Overview. And when we make our Works Cited, we're just going to squeeze in all the information we have together. So that would look like this. So I'm going to start with the title of the source since there's no author. And for my in-text citation, I'm going to do a shortened title. So the long title is Hong Kong Economy Overview, and my in-text citation will just be Hong Kong. I'm going to keep the quotes around this because that tells me that it is an article. So it's useful information for your reader. And then every other piece of information we'll have, we'll just squeeze that together. The date of access is often really nice to include. It's not necessary to include it if the content won't change, but in some cases the content might change, so especially then you want to go ahead and put that date of access. I encourage you to use the student voices as an example, as a model you could learn from. So for example, here we have a works cited page for this essay about homelessness, and you can see that some of the sources start with the last name. Other sources start with the title of the work. And that's fine. You just want to make sure that whatever is here matches up with your in-text citation. So here, the statistic about the number of homeless residents in San Francisco increasing from 7,000 to 870,000 is from this source, City. So this just matches up with City performance scorecards. So if I wanted to read more, I would know to just look on the works cited for this entry here. And you can see that, this one matches up with this one, and then in state, this matches up with the state of homelessness, which is from an organization called the National Alliance to End Homelessness, which is a great, credible organization. So it's fine if there's no author. You just want to make sure that your in-text citation matches up really nicely with your works cited citation. I want to talk a little bit about introducing sources. So when you're introducing sources in the body of your essay, it's really nice for specific authors if you include a little bit about the credentials of those authors. So if it is written by a person who's noteworthy and an expert, you want to go ahead and give your reader a little bit of information about that. So for instance, if I was writing about Elon Musk, I could do this with just a set of commas and his credentials here. And then I would have my verb and then the quote, and then page number, paragraph number, for instance. So many ways to introduce Elon Musk. You could call him an entrepreneur. You could call him the founder and owner of SpaceX. You could call him the founder of Tesla. So many ways you might introduce him. So thinking a little bit about bias. If you find sources that express a really specific point of view, it might feel like they're a little biased. So you might be wondering, is the source still credible? Is it still trustworthy? Is it still okay to include in your essay? The easiest thing to do is to find sources on the library database, then you know they're trustworthy. But let's say you run across a really great source that's not on the library database, and it feels a little biased in terms of tone. You can still trust the source. For this class, it's still considered credible as long as it's fact-checked by some group of editors. So this is the case with scholarly journals, with newspaper articles. They go through some sort of review editorial board that approves them and checks all the information. So as long as your information is from an organization that fact checks and the organization itself is not an extreme organization, you can trust it. So for an example of organizations that are kind of extreme, an organization like PETA has a pretty questionable reputation, and they're known for being really heated with their rhetoric, and some people feel they're very extreme. So you may also want to mention the credentials as a way to show the person is expressing a specific point of view. So let's say I find this really great article, and it's by Rutger Bregman, and I want to express the idea that he has a very specific point of view, that he has a certain political leaning and a certain way of looking at the world. So what I could do is I could just go ahead and include that in the credentials. So I could say something like, he's a journalist who believes in basic income, or that he's a social progressive, or that he's a critic of conservative economic policy. And here what I'm doing is I'm just letting you know that as a writer, I know this person has a particular point of view and falls into a certain camp of thinking, and that can be really nice. So should you worry if there's no author? No. If the information is presented by a reputable organization, you don't need to worry. And then if it's from an organization that's really trustworthy, you might use that organization's name in the signal phrase to boost the credibility of the statistic or research finding or quote. So here's an example. Let's say that I'm reading this article on childhood obesity, and it's by this guy named Rich Morin, and then I look up Rich Morin, and he's not really a famous figure, but he is someone who wrote it for Pew Research Center, and Pew itself is a very well-known organization. So I might want to say, according to Pew, and then go ahead and put that information in. I still want what's in my parentheses to match up. So here we do have an author's name, so that will be the first thing that I include in my parentheses. But it does kind of boost the credibility to know that he is a writer for Pew. So my works cited, because we have an author, it will start with his name. Here is a little bit from the CDC, and in this case, there is no author. So my in-text citation, I would just say, according to the CDC. And in my parentheses, I'm going to use the title of the source, childhood obesity. And then here is the, this is shortened title, here's the full title, childhood obesity causes and consequences. So that matches up with this. So you might mention an organization in a signal phrase if it feels more relevant than the specific author, but you still want to match whatever's in your parentheses with your works cited page. So for MLA, use present tense or present perfect tense. You want to try to mix up your verbs and not write writes in each citation. And feel free to include sources to write against them. You might bring in a source that you feel like presents a point of view you don't agree with, and you can include that source and then analyze what's problematic about that point of view or why you don't agree with that point of view. So you might have this question: what if a statistic appears in so many sources? So the number 8 million tons of plastic dumped in the ocean every year is everywhere on the internet. If I Google that, we can see that there's over 1 million results for that. So many results for that. So what you want to do then is you want to go ahead and you want to pick out the most credible source. And then you want to cite that source in your in-text citation and on your works cited page. This is a way to boost your credibility. It saves your reader time. You're not relying on your reader to Google that information and see that it's credible. Instead, you're telling your reader, this is a statistic, and if you want to read more and find out more, this is a great source for you. So go to this Reuters source about this. So basically, if a statistic appears in many sources, choose the most credible. Or another option is you could include a few. So if you include a few sources, that shows your reader that this statistic is floating around many places on the internet. The only downside of including a few, so here are 3 sources, 3 last names, is you would have to then include each of those on your works cited page. So it might be a little bit more work. I want to talk a little bit about common knowledge. The only thing you don't need to cite in your essay is common knowledge. So what's common knowledge? It's dates of historic events, so dates of world wars, dates of major events. Any kind of biographical information about famous people is considered common knowledge because it's out there on the internet in so many places. So if I wanted to say that Barack Obama was a lawyer in Chicago and he was born in such and such day, I don't need to include that. That's everywhere on the internet. And then also things that are known within a field that aren't super specific, but just accepted within a field. That is also considered common knowledge. So for example, meditation reduces stress for all age groups, including children. This is considered common knowledge. But if you get really specific, elementary students who participate in mindfulness training have better emotional self-regulation and social competence. Now we're getting pretty specific, so we want to go ahead and cite that. So you can include the last names. If it was a few studies, you can include more than one, as I've done here. So just to recap, you want to cite quotes, paraphrases, summaries, facts, statistics, data, and you want to cite those in the body of your essay and also on your works cited page. So please feel free to email me if you have any questions or text me. I'm happy to answer those. Thanks for watching this short video.